Lower Olentangy River and Ecosystem Restoration Practices by Rolando Muniz and Sarah Miller. In 1935, the city of Columbus built the Fifth Avenue Dam on the Olentangy River as a source of cooling water intake for a power plant on OSU premises. Over time, the power plant and thus the dam were rendered useless. As a result, adverse effects to river ecosystem health due to the presence of the dam became seen as avoidable. In the early 2000s, NGOs like FLOW, Friends of the Lower Olentangy Watershed, petitioned for something to be done. The resulting series of process and deliberation is a great example of the logic model approach to restoration we've discussed in class. A decade was dedicated to planning the project. This is probably examples of both stubborn bureaucratic red tape and scrupulous planning and environmental consideration. After a plan was decided, treatments were selected and phases were designed as a greater outline for the physical undertaking of the project. The final phase of extensive monitoring gives way for adaptive management. $6.9 million was allocated for the project, given from a variety of stakeholders including the university, the city of Columbus, and several of the state's various environmental programs. The money was used for efforts including dam removal, the construction of wetlands along the banks of the river, physical changes to hydrology including the creation of new riffles and pools, planting vegetation in the riparian zone, among several other practices like stabilizing and strengthening the banks of the river using natural methods. According to Abel et al. In a paper published in 2000, the freshwater ecoregion the river is a part of is considered outstanding in regards to its overall biodiversity of aquatic species found in it, resulting in increased biodiversity of bird species that benefit from this. However, consequences of the dam's presence included the reduction of biodiversity of both as a result of loss of habitat, lentic hydrology conditions, nutrient pollution, and reduced dissolved oxygen in the system. The destruction of the dam and introduction of new pools, riffles, and wetlands, all aimed at helping these ecological categories recover. More short-term goals included extracting invasive plant species, observing growth of planet-native species of plants and trees in riparian and wetland zones, and increased discharge of the river following rain and snow events. More medium-term goals, hoped to have been met by the end of the 5-year monitoring period, included reduce invasive woody plant cover to less than 5%, and increasing native woody plant cover to equal or greater than 80%. Also, the hydrochemical health of the river is hoped to have been improved, specifically reduced levels of nitrogen and phosphorus, and increased levels of dissolved oxygen. This, in turn, is hoped to have introduced increased biodiversity of fish, amphibians, aerial insectivores, and other species to the system. More long-term goals include positive growth of native plant species, specifically that of native trees, near or complete eradication of invasive plants, and an overall healthy, self-sustaining hydrological and its surrounding terrestrial system. Now we will go on a virtual tour as we walk from just south of Tuttle Park towards the wetland label D on the map. These next couple of pictures are of riffles that were made in the system. The first one in 2012 is when the riffle was first made. It's located just north of Lane Avenue and just north of Wetland D. And the second picture is of the riffle as it stands now. And riffles help the system in a couple of ways. The first is by aerating the system, so by increasing dissolved oxygen. And the second is by increasing habitat diversity for various species found in the system. This clip shows a portion of Wetland D, and also it demonstrates its close proximity to Ohio State property. Wetlands are important for several reasons. First and mainly foremost is their ability at nutrient cycling and retention, and as a result they act as critical pollution buffers, especially since this is an urban watershed. And plus they add to habitat diversity for other organisms, both plant and animal. This clip is taken directly from OSU property, and I think it nicely demonstrates that this project is also supposed to be aesthetically pleasing, that's one of the end goals of it. As you can see, OSU has planted a lot of plants and trees, and while the overall goal is to make the system more healthy, it's also to make the area look prettier. Now we venture downstream towards the largest wetland, Wetland A, that is located between King Avenue Bridge and Fifth Avenue Bridge. This clip is a good example of something that informs the public about the project. Not only does it list the history of the dam and its removal, but it also shows the various stakeholders that helped in restoring the area. These next two clips show examples of soil restoration practices, so the green mesh and the hay are there. I presume in order to keep the soil in place and from running off, and also to protect it from invasive species. The first clip was an example of vegetation not growing, and the second clip shows vegetation growing strongly. I really like this clip because it shows the importance of the wetlands. So you see algae growing, and that is a sign of increased nutrients in the water. Another cool restoration practice that I recognize from our class discussions is their practice of live branch layering in order to stabilize the banks of the river, which essentially was outplanting bare rootstock of vegetation. I'm not sure which specific kind, but the idea is that they grow roots and stabilize the bank that way, but it also adds vegetation to the area. A common trait of urban watersheds are these sewer systems that end up leading into rivers. And before the wetland was constructed, it went right into the river, but now it goes into the wetland, which of course filters out the excess nutrients in sewage. Something I have yet to touch on are the invasive species, because that's also an aspect of this restoration. And to talk more about that, specifically with the catchment connecting to Tuttle Park, is my partner Sarah.
The U.S. Forest Service is currently studying the effects of invasive plant species just along the Olentangy Trail that can easily be viewed as visitors walk, run, or bike along the trail. The focus of the invasive species study is mainly Lonicera, or known by its common name, honeysuckle. Species such as this are taking over the area at an alarming rate and preventing the growth of native species. Current restoration focuses on what levels of invasive species removal must be done for the successful growth of native species. Because disease has done a number on multiple native woody tree species, we must attempt to remove any other factors that could negatively affect their growth. This clip is an example of an area in Tuttle where all invasives have been manually removed. Then compare that to this next clip where some honeysuckle has been removed, but most has been left to grow on its own. Current studies being done for the U.S. Forest Service are looking at the amount of honeysuckle present and the survival rates of planted elm trees. Each of those plastic tubes you see have an individual elm tree being protected from other environmental factors that could affect the study. As honeysuckle grows, it gets thick foliage that can block native species from getting the sunlight necessary to survive. To test the effects of honeysuckle growth, there are 3 site locations, one with no invasive species removal, one with partial removal, and one with full removal. You can easily find stumps like this where Lonicera has been removed in each of these sites. Once these study sites were established, researchers periodically use a large lux meter to measure sun intensity over each planted tree. This will begin to tell how much large-scale invasive species removal must be done in the future for native species to thrive and get the sunlight necessary for survival.
This project has truly been a community project, and that's why it was so fascinating to study it. Although signs are visible that results haven't been perfect, the massive undertaking and positive outcomes do deserve an applause. Not only have the myriad of stakeholders attempted to create a healthier river system, they've also made attempts to educate the wider public on the importance of their work. And although wins do come few and far between in the environmental sciences, it's truly refreshing celebrating those that do come, especially when the result benefits everyone involved.